안녕하세요, 여러분들. Hello, everybody. Welcome. So today I have my good friend here with me, Brian. Brian, why don't you go
Hello.
ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian. I have a program called Tomorrow's Good Habits Today, and I teach business English and coach people with career development. Nice to meet you.
Hmm. So the reason I have Brian here with me is we're going to talk about his experience with living and working here in Korea. So Brian, why don't you give us a little background about that?
So I came from Texas to Korea in 2010,
Hmm.
and I taught elementary school English for 3 years in a kind of country town, so to speak.
Hmm.
Uh, and that was probably one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. I used to travel quite a bit
Hmm.
in college. So and I thought wasn't going to be like anything too special, but
Hmm.
I promise you it was completely different. And I almost didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
So met my wife, got married, came back to the US, had our daughter,
Hmm.
and then after a couple of years we're like, let's go back. So we went back again. so uh, and I was told by a friend of mine, who I might touch on in a second, but he's the director of a nonprofit,
Hmm.
and he told me that the old joke was, when you leave Korea, you always come back. And we came back. We had a good few years
Hmm.
where I was teaching business English and coaching a lot of people, and then we recently came back to the US.
Hmm.
But honestly, that was probably the most exciting time of my life, and had a lot of opportunity.
Hmm.
And and as far as my hobbies go, like with
Hmm.
photography, one of the most beautiful times I've ever had.
Oh
I
yeah.
think, yeah, just walking around in Korea is kind of breathtaking
When
overall.
I think too, like, we kind of joke about it. When you lived here, like you lived in North Korea, and he didn't literally
Yeah,
live in North Korea, but
I was
it was
close.
so far north. Uh, but that's kind of like when you get away from Seoul, you get away from the big city. There's so much more things to see and do that people forget. Like you and I, we went hiking up the mountain. We took pictures at sunset. Uh, I mean,
Yeah,
camping. Like, there's a lot of great nature things that in Seoul you can't get. But
amazing. Yeah,
I know
yeah.
too. Your like you said, your school out here was definitely out in the boonies area, but you also had the opportunity to work in Seoul. Uh, I mean, how was that different for you?
Oh, okay. Yeah, good point. That was like night and day almost. And while I was working in Seoul, I continued to live in the suburbs,
Mm.
or North Korea, as we joke. So I took the train
Hmm.
to Seoul, which was sort of like a very busy
Yeah.
workplace. Everybody was very motivated and on the move and on the go. I had the fortune of working with, um, you know, uh, executives, or
Hmm.
with a professor, or very successful, well-to-do people.
Hmm.
But that was very cut and dry, just very serious. I had to wear like a tie and suit and everything, and comb my hair, and be very presentable. And I worked very hard for that. I had to
Yeah.
do a lot of homework and preparation. Then when I went back home to the suburbs,
Hmm.
we lived in kind of a very quaint town that was very family friendly.
Hmm.
Seoul, you know, people like to work hard and then play hard. So
Yep.
they drink a lot of, soju for dinner. Um, and that's not always the case. I don't mean to overgeneralize.
No, but you're right.
Um,
Like in your that area, I mean, by like 9 o'clock, it was quiet outside. Where in
yeah,
Seoul,
yeah, yeah. Oh,
it's
yeah,
maybe
yeah,
like
yeah.
1 or 2 a.m. People are still out there
Sure.
doing stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we could have a couple drinks where I
Mhm.
lived, but it was pretty casual,
Yeah.
and we didn't have any kind of drinking
Mhm.
problems or anything where I lived, so that was quite nice. Um, and so that experience was quite nice, because that town was developed more recently,
Hmm.
which was a bit more planned,
Oh
and,
yeah.
and very presentable and pretty. And the walks during the springtime or the fall was kind of
Mhm.
breathtaking.
Oh yeah.
So we enjoyed having that kind of balance of peace
Mhm.
with the busyness of Seoul on the weekdays,
Hmm.
when I was working.
Yeah.
And that was probably my favorite aspect of it, because I could go to work, get in all that busyness, be very motivated, and get back and just
Mhm.
kind of have that relaxing
Yeah.
experience. And that was it was a really nice contrast.
And
Yeah,
I
I liked it
think
a lot.
you brought up a really good point too. Is a lot of the schools or academies, especially as well, that teach English here in Seoul, I mean, teachers don't really get a break. You're working pretty much from, I want to say like 8 a.m. until midnight, because you've got
Hmm.
prep, you've got to grade, you've
Hmm.
got to prepare. I mean, there's so many different things. And you kind of get sucked into the daily routine of like, after you're done with school, you go to the bar, grab a few drinks, go home, and then every day's the same.
Hmm.
Where
Yeah.
I think for you too, especially as a family man, you kind of realize like you can't live it that way. But it's
Right. Yeah.
in Korea, like it's kind of sad because there's a lot of businessmen, especially, who that's pretty much all they do. They work, drink, come home, and then work, drink, come home. Yeah.
Yeah, for most people, I think the past couple of years has brought some
Mhm.
changes.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of social changes,
Yeah.
which I view favorably.
Mhm.
When we first came back, I kind of, for a second, I kind of was like, am I going to kick myself for this?
Yeah.
Like, is this going to be too tough on family life? But I'm very happy about the way things turned out. I mean, most people have seemed to have calmed down from that.
Yeah.
There's still a bit of that drinking culture,
Mhm.
but it's not nearly as strong as it
Yeah.
used to be.
Well, and for
Yeah.
those of you who don't know, Korea has what's called the 회식. 회식 is kind of like a business dinner, but you don't really talk about business. Like it's mostly just the boss buying beer or soju and meat, right? Like you have to go to,
Barbecue, yeah,
yeah,
to grill, yeah,
you and
yeah.
you have to go. If you say no, like it really looks bad for you, right?
Right, yeah, it's sort
Yeah.
of viewed as a team building experience,
Mhm.
um, or an unofficial team building experience.
Yeah, which again, like
Uh,
you said too, the laws changed in the past couple of years, so it's not
yeah,
as
mhm,
frequent. But
mhm,
I mean, these days that you have Hueshik, like some days it gets really crazy because you have like,
yeah,
first round, second round, third round, and it goes forever.
yeah, yeah, that's and then they go back to work the next
Yep.
day,
Unfazed.
torturing themselves. Yeah, very, very hungover. Um, so I mean, I have a lot of respect
Mm,
for a lot of those guys that do it, because it was explained to me that it's sort of a sacrifice that they make
yeah.
so that they can enable
Mm,
their own, um, you know, I guess their own movement
yeah.
economically, and to kind of help their family
Mm,
have a better life. So yeah, there's some debate about that.
mm.
The other thing is that I really like the taste of grilled meat
Oh, yeah.
and soju together. And I don't want to sound like an alcoholic or someone that's very like intense about
Mm.
meats or something, but um, yeah, it's kind of a clean taste. I
Oh,
mean, it
yeah.
tastes good,
Mhm.
and somehow the soju makes it taste more clean in a way. So it gets and plus there's a lot of like activities
Oh,
and
yeah.
very there's a lot of like interaction and
Yep.
stuff.
It's
So
very
it
social,
makes it
which
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of
Oh yeah, oh
surprising
yeah.
because like, in general, Koreans don't act very social. But during Hueshik, like they're
Right.
overacting like it's
Yeah,
amazing to see.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a unique balance.
Yeah.
Again, it's Korea and its balances. I liked it.
Mm.
I don't like it often,
Yeah.
but I liked it enough. It's being over here in Texas, I still miss having that
Oh
occasionally
yeah.
and try to recreate. It's not exactly the same, but I try to recreate it occasionally.
Yeah.
Um, that so that's a very unique dynamic that
Mm.
we had in Korea. It made it to where um, I didn't feel like my life was, uh, you know, just the same old routine every day.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
and so there were a lot of interesting things happening, and like I said, Korea's always on the move,
Yep.
and especially in Seoul, so there's always something new happening,
Yeah.
and so a lot of times the people that I will be working with will be like, "Hey, there's this new thing. Let's
Yep.
go check it out."
Yeah.
This
The
new,
trends catch on really
yeah,
quickly.
yeah,
And
yeah,
when
yeah.
there's something new, everybody wants to get on it as fast as they can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that's really special. So
Yeah.
we had some really cool things that we were
Mm.
that we got to do. But honestly, on the weekends when it was like my time off,
Mhm.
I looked forward to having like these short road trips.
Oh yeah.
So we would drive out further into the
Mhm.
countryside, for a couple hours on,
Yeah.
on Saturday or something and come back on Sunday, for example, and just explore all the different areas
Mm.
around Korea as well, because they had a lot of fun places like
Yeah.
Namisam and, places like that.
Especially
Yeah.
like, if you just drive like 1 hour out of Seoul and you can go any direction, there's always
Mm.
something and it's something new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's always been fun. We found a lot of good places to eat and play and all
Mm.
kinds of stuff like that. So if I had to sum it up real quickly, for single life, if you just wanted to go and drink and eat and work, it's great. For family
Mm.
life, if you want to go and find some like activities to do and there's lots of play places and stuff like that, it's great. So yeah, I liked
It's
both.
true. Yeah. Now, I've got a question for you then.
Hmm. Go ahead.
How did you choose which school you got to teach at? Because I know a lot of people
Oh,
are always curious about like, do they just choose their own school or is there a general list
mhm.
and they choose them? What is the process like?
Okay. That's a good question. I I had applied in 2009,
Mhm.
and the process was like, you put in all the paperwork
Mm.
and your proof of, all your background and stuff,
Yep.
background check. And the next part was they would ask you what area of Korea you wanted to be
Mm.
in. So did you want Seoul? Did you want Gyeongi, which is the
Mm.
province surrounding Seoul, or other provinces? Some of the hot choices were Seoul, Gyeonggi,
I think
and
Busan.
then
Yeah.
Busan, and then Jeju,
Oh yeah.
because the beaches and
Mhm.
stuff. So I chose Gyeonggi because one of my old classmates from high school had told me
Mm.
that you get all the benefits of Seoul
Mhm.
without being so expensive.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So that's why I chose it.
that's a very good point. Seoul is
Yeah.
for living, it's really expensive. And
Hmm.
again, if you just cross the border of Seoul to Gyeonggi, the
Hmm.
price is so different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. And so I had a bigger apartment than
Mm.
everybody
Mhm.
else, which was quite nice.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think living out in that kind of country area, everybody
Mhm.
was much nicer.
Mm.
Um, I've seen the way that moms and schools and
Yeah.
teachers and stuff can get in Seoul, and it's
Mhm.
it's ruthless. So,
Yeah.
uh, and
Recently, did you hear the news about the mom who was scolded on TV? Uh, there's a new TV program about families and parents raising their kids, and they scolded her because she was being a tiger mom, only
oh
constantly
yeah,
attacking the child. And they decided like clinically she's depressed, she needs to be taken care of, but the mom
mm,
didn't care. And for those who don't know, like in Seoul, that's a very common problem. The
hmm, hmm,
moms especially push to be the best, only study. I mean, it's difficult.
yeah. I think you probably know as well as I do,
Mhm.
being half Asian.
Yeah.
These kind of stereotypes about the Asian mom,
Hmm.
pushing the child and stuff.
Yep.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of truth to it, and it's
Yeah.
just a kind of cultural thing.
Yep.
There is a lot of effort to break from that.
Yeah.
But also, when times get hard like this, I think
Mhm.
it pushes people to push their kids
Yeah.
more. So yeah, I've definitely seen that.
Mm.
Um, the the yeah the mothers have come to me before,
Mm.
and this is back when I was teaching kids,
Yep.
and they've 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 done everything from like telling me sob stories to
Yeah.
demanding that I teach a certain way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's they can be quite involved. If
Yeah.
anybody's not aware, tiger parent or tiger mom is sort of the same, very similar as like a helicopter parent.
But
Very
it's
similar.
like 100 times worse, I think.
Yeah, because they put more pressure on the student.
Yeah.
Helicopter parents, they put more pressure on
On
the
the parent.
school
Yeah.
and the teachers. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the kind of harsh reality of that. um, yeah. Oh, so I'm sorry, but coming back to
Mm.
the school thing when I was choosing
Oh
it,
yeah. Yeah.
um, so I chose the Gyeonggi area as I was saying
Mm.
because of the uh, a friend of mine who had told me. So when I did that, I was waiting to hear back,
Hmm.
and then they gave us, um, me and my friends some choices,
Okay.
and so I chose that town because it was near, sort of like these other big cities,
Hmm.
which were near Seoul.
Yeah.
So the first big city is Ujungbu,
Hmm.
which is sort of like um, I guess a big satellite city of
It
Seoul.
really is. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then just north of that is Dongducheon, which
Hmm.
is pretty big for the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Back at the time, I think they moved them
They moved them down to
from now, but
Pimtech. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I thought, oh, that's great. I'll have a big city near me,
Mm.
and then I'll have the military near me, so I can have like access to a lot of American,
Hmm.
conveniences,
Yeah.
so to speak. And so I was between both towns in a town called Yangju,
Mm.
which is very country in a way. But I enjoyed that 100%.
Mm.
That's hands down my favorite town in Korea.
Now, when you were here in Korea, and you, like you said, you've kind of been back and forth. What was your experience with the language? Like, I know, I've met your wife and your daughter. I know your wife speaks Korean, and the times we've been out, like, I kind of push you to try to speak some Korean, but
Hmm, hmm,
when you were
hmm.
here, what was your experience with that like?
Definitely the first 3 years was the hardest,
Mm.
because everything I was learning was just what kids say in elementary school. And so I wasn't really learning
Mm.
anything real. I mean, it
Yeah.
was it was just very basic stuff. I was trying a couple of programs that I found online, and my co-teacher was trying to show me some stuff, but
Mhm.
I think it was very difficult for him to teach it to me,
Yeah.
and it was very, and the material that we had probably wasn't the best.
Mm.
And I had even bought some books at the bookstore. Like I tried all kinds of stuff, and
Mm.
um, it was not easy at first,
Mm.
but by the time I had left after 3 years, there were quite a few things that I was exposed to because of my wife.
Mhm.
So, having met her about halfway through that time that I was in Korea the first time,
Oh yeah.
that helped me quite a bit to pick up more.
Mhm.
She has shared so much with me tremendously, and that kind of was like my real immersion
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
And meeting her family and getting more into like Korean tradition
Mhm.
and culture. Then when I came back the second time and I started my own program,
Mhm.
and I was going out to meet people on my own, that forced me to be more immersive.
Yeah.
That was the real highlight, I think.
Yep.
Just the real like jumping into it,
Yeah.
um, without so much of the formal study.
Well, and I think too, I joke a lot of times. I'll tell people, like, if you want to learn a language, it doesn't have to be Korean, but any language, like, find a boyfriend or a girlfriend and just use it as much as you can with them.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, right. Yeah.
not saying it's the only way, but if you think in that style, like, surround yourself with
Mhm.
people from that country and just practice, practice, practice. For me, I hated learning the grammar, and I never really did. In all honesty, like, I just started
Oh, okay,
speaking
sure.
as
Yeah.
much as I could.
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah, yeah.
do I regret that? Not really, because I figure, for business and everything, it's better that I can speak than it is than writing. Uh, but today too, even for my job, I'm still teaching. It's good for me to know enough Korean to converse with the parents, especially.
Mhm.
They always have concerns, and if you don't know what they're saying or what they're asking, it's really a pain to have to, like, go back and forth between a medium and communicate, like, I want to focus on this but they don't want that, and, like, it's a real, I mean, it's chaos.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you're right. That gets pretty hard, and I lived in an area that probably had a little bit different dialect
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
Soulites, and and then Seoul has a different dialect
Yep.
than the southern province
Mhm.
and Busan and Jeju, and
Yeah.
it all kind of changes. And then you had the different personalities. Some
Yep.
people were very bold, and then some people were very passive in their
Yeah.
communication. And so that got kind of hard to
Mhm.
get around. There's so many cultural and personality aspects
Mhm.
to the character of speaking Korean
Mm.
that you don't get in the textbook. I
No,
mean,
not at all. Yeah.
learning the basic stuff like the vocabulary and stuff, that's
Mhm.
important for sure. But once you get past that, there's a huge kind of uh, I guess I don't want to say uphill,
Mhm. Yeah,
but
I was gonna say like there is a big gap, right? Like
yeah, yeah,
getting
yeah,
to the
yeah. It's like a
point
leap.
where you can speak comfortably, but also in a kind of non-childlike way. That's the
Yeah,
really hard
right.
thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, and I tell a lot of people too, like when Americans, especially when we try to speak Korean, we have a really strong American accent, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. We tend to overpronounce things.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's not bad, but people here in Korea, they're kind of more excited about that. I think like they're really happy
Oh
to see
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. They like it. I think it's just as long as you're trying to communicate,
yeah,
they respect that.
mhm,
And I would feel the same way about someone who's trying to speak in English,
yeah,
because that's my the service that I provide
mhm,
is helping people communicate in English much better.
yeah,
And part of that is also to have the confidence
mhm,
and to be able to find the way to speak more effectively,
yeah,
not just not just working on the perfect accent.
mhm,
Because I think some people get really shy about that, and then
yeah,
I say, well, if you stop talking because you're scared of your accent, you're going to stop learning.
yep,
You have to try and make mistakes,
yep,
you know? And so the same with Korean.
mhm,
You cannot stop because you're embarrassed. And here's the thing. We over enunciate sometimes because we're American,
yep,
안녕하세요,
yep,
John and Brian. And so, you know, and it sounds kind of cheesy,
mhm,
and people giggle.
yeah.
People
But
giggle. Oh,
it's
yeah.
not a negative giggle. Like that's the one thing that
Yes.
as Americans, like if
Yes, you're right.
people laugh at us, we're like we feel ashamed, like we did something wrong
Yeah.
and they're putting us
Mhm.
down. But here in Korea, it's not that way.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
actually
yeah.
like really happy and like they're
Mhm.
so elated. They're like, "Oh my God, they're trying to speak Korean."
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Elated is the perfect word for that.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And so whenever I would, say something, just earlier today, I
Mhm.
was talking about the shrimp chips,
Oh,
새우깡,
yeah.
but I can never say the gang part,
Yeah.
gang.
Yep.
I never say it right. So they were all like, "Oh, Brian says gang, 새우깡." So, uh, so the thing is that we tend to over enunciate things, and it's a little bit incorrect, but
Mhm.
and people giggle at us, but it's meant out of some, I
Mhm.
guess they're kind of charmed by it in a way.
Yeah.
And I I never feel insecure about that.
Yeah.
So I think one of the best pieces of advice that I can give is that if you're trying to learn the language and you're trying to interact with somebody in Korean,
Mhm.
don't stop if you have some kind of,
Yeah.
if you feel like insecure about your pronunciation,
Mhm.
or if you missed a word, just
Yeah.
keep trying. That's
That's
that's the
right.
only way.
I
Yeah.
think too, you'll be really surprised, especially by the older kind of like restaurant workers as well. Like, I
Mhm.
don't know about you, but I've had some experiences where I'll go out to eat and I'll order in Korean and they're so surprised, but they see like how well like I would eat. And they're like,
Mhm.
hey, here's something else. Try this. It's service, it's free. And I'm just like, sure, thanks. You eat that. And they're like, oh my God, he can eat that. Let's bring some more.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's right. They love that.
Yeah.
Oh, man, yeah. Sharing a food experience is
Mhm.
is great in
Oh,
Korea.
yeah.
And so, I know that there's, like, all these mukbang videos,
Mhm.
but before that, there were all
Yeah.
these TV shows where
Yes.
it would show people just, groups of friends going out to eat together, and they would order something, and
Yeah.
then there's all these oohs and
Yep.
ahs, and, and it becomes an experience. And so whenever I went out to eat with people,
Mhm.
it was like that. It was like
Yeah.
it wasn't just eating, it was an experience.
Mhm.
That interaction was hugely important. It
Yeah.
was like a cultural and language experience as
Mhm.
well.
So I think for the last question I want to ask you is, what are some tips or suggestions that you would give to those who are interested in coming out to Korea, whether it's to live, to teach, or just to visit?
Yeah, the first thing is do it the legal way. So get your credentials right, and apply through the process. They have recruiters
Mhm.
that guide you through that.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm saying that is because there are unfortunately
Mhm.
some cases where people get into like a private academy,
Yeah.
which is called a hagwon, and sometimes it goes really bad.
Mhm.
It's not the case so much nowadays as it was
Even like
20, 30 years ago.
I want to say even like 5 years ago, like it was
Oh
still
yeah, yeah, yeah.
pretty
It's cleaned up a
bad,
lot.
but it's cleaned up a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So get your credentials right,
Mm.
work with a recruiter, and usually the recruiters find more work with a reputable
Yeah.
recruiter because they usually find more reputable schools or programs.
Mm.
There's different arguments about going to the public school or going to a private
Mm.
academy. I'm not going to get into that
Yeah.
because I
That
started my own
honestly,
program.
there's so many different
Yeah,
pros and cons to both sides. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I started my own program after teaching in public school,
Mm.
but I don't have any bias towards one or the
Mhm.
other. Um, the next thing is that when you are coming to Korea, obviously do a little research,
Mhm.
do your homework, find out about your area,
Yeah.
find out about certain words that are going to be important to you, like, uh, you know, uh, jihacho, which is
Yep.
the subway, or a restaurant with this, which is shikdang, and
Yeah.
just learn that like those little important things that you're going to need to know.
Mhm.
And also, if you go to Seoul or another major
Mhm.
metropolitan, don't be surprised that people speak English.
Yeah. I have to say, I think that was the first thing when I came to Seoul. Uh,
Hmm.
like the first experience I remember trying to speak Korean was I went
Hmm.
to the Itaewon McDonald's
Hmm.
and
Oh,
I ordered in Korean. I was like, Big Mac set 하나 주세요. And the the worker was just like, is that for here to go? Like, do you want it large or
yeah,
small? I was like,
right.
wait, what?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
it totally blew my mind. But then I was like,
Hmm.
oh, this is going to happen. It's not as
Hmm.
common. I think it's not as common as it should be, but you should be prepared. Certain
Hmm.
areas definitely are going to have English speakers who are workers, and you should be prepared
Hmm.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah, especially in areas where a lot of English speakers congregate.
Hmm.
So Itaewon, there's hot spots. There's
Although it's
even the towns that were around me.
not really anymore Itaewon, but like
Right. Oh
anywhere by
yeah,
like army
Itaewon's kind of
bases
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
I think like Gangnam because it's business, they still
Gangnam,
have
a
quite a
lot of
few.
educated people that speak really good English who
Yes.
spent time overseas.
And if you go to like
Um,
the tourist areas, like the Jamsil, I think is one that actually even today doesn't really speak a lot of English anymore. Myeongdong, Insadong, Namdaemun, Dongdaemun, like those areas, there are
the market areas,
yeah,
they speak broken English, but
it's good
they've
enough.
yeah, it's good enough to get by, but
Yeah.
they speak less of it because there's more of
Mhm.
a ratio of Chinese and Japanese tourists.
Yeah. I
So they
think
speak like
the
a little
only
bit less
English I
English.
remember that they'll say is like, "Hey, where are you from?"
Yeah. I like Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
So yeah, the area Itaewon's interesting
Mhm.
because it used to be for a lot of English speakers to gather
Yep.
there, but it's turned more into kind of like a very like nice fancy place to go
Yeah.
for like
It's cleaned up a
international
lot.
restaurants.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think too it's like if you go there today, a lot of those restaurants are kind of dying out and
Mhm,
again, it's with what's going on in the world, but if you understand Korea and the real estate, you understand
mhm,
that the people who own land or own buildings, they
mhm.
increase rent whenever they feel like it, and there's not any
Yeah,
rhyme
it's a
to
big
reason.
problem.
You know,
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
thinking like, "Oh, people are coming to Itaewon, raise your rates." But then people stop
Mhm.
coming and they're like, "Hey, you're still making money, raise it again." And then
Yeah, yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot of
right.
businesses that have just closed down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pretty bad formula.
Mhm.
Which is kind of funny. I keep joking to everybody that you should sell your home in Korea and then buy a mansion
Oh
in
yeah.
the US or something because the cost of living is so high.
Yeah.
Um, which is another interesting thing
Mhm.
because I was making pretty good money in Seoul,
Mhm.
but also the cost of living in
Yeah.
Seoul it's really really high.
And
And
especially
in Korea in general as
in
well.
Korea in general, but I think definitely, like you said, in Seoul, and especially
Mhm,
in the major education areas,
mhm,
Gangnam is a very good example. that for a small like 1 bedroom studio apartment, you're paying like $1
Mhm.
million to like rent
A
it.
year.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah,
not even
yeah,
yours. It's just renting. And it's like this little
yeah.
small like 3 by 3 room,
Really small, like a studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, or
Yeah.
inefficiency.
Which they call,
Um,
the Goshi one. That's kind of like, oh man.
yeah, yeah. I don't I don't really so if you don't really have a lot of money or a lot of pay, I don't really recommend moving into Seoul right away.
Yeah. If you can
There are
if you can
places
definitely
that
stay outside, it's I think a lot
yeah,
better.
yeah, yeah. There are places that try to provide a kind
Mhm.
of apartment for you in Seoul, but usually you have to share with a
Yeah.
roommate. So it's up to you. But um the yeah, I mean the housing situation, that's a new dynamic that's
Mhm.
getting worse, and that might be kind of a mix up for a lot of people coming into Korea. Um, so that I guess that kind of brings me to a new point, which is to um, which is to make sure that you have certain comforts and that you can
Yeah.
adapt to these kind of situations.
Mhm.
There's a lot of challenges that come up,
Yeah.
and have you ever heard of the what was it called? The culture shock U curve, I think is what it's called.
Oh, yeah, I have heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you basically start at the top
Mhm.
and
You eventually go down.
you get culture shock, yeah,
Yeah.
and you just like, oh my god, you start feeling down. You're like,
Yep.
oh my god, and you hit the bottom,
Mhm.
and then you start to adapt,
Yep.
and then you come back up, and it's like a U curve,
Yeah.
and so and then you eventually you really adapt to things and you kind of integrate a little bit more. It's really hard to integrate right away
Mhm.
because conveniences that we have, like in the US, for
Mhm.
example, I, buying a car here and driving around and
Oh, yeah.
having the freedom to drive around is really easy
Mhm.
and affordable. And the car is large enough for my height. I'm over 6 feet,
Yep.
so it's large enough for me. But in Korea, it was really hard to do all
Yeah.
that. And but there's other conveniences.
Mhm.
Like in Korea, there's really fast internet everywhere, really
Yep.
fast Wi-Fi everywhere,
Yeah.
and there's a really good public transportation system.
I
So
think
you have
that's
these
the best thing.
trade-offs.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
definitely, there's
yeah.
a lot of trade-offs, and it really depends on the person.
Mhm,
I've
mhm.
I've known some people, I'm sure you've known some people as well, who they're English teachers in Korea. They've never learned Korean, but all they do is complain. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
why don't
It's
people speak
unfortunate.
English, and why can't I? And it's like, well, what do you expect? You're in Korea, adapt or
True.
get out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
yeah.
what's funny, actually, a lot of people do speak English. They
Mhm.
just don't show it right away
Yeah.
because I told somebody that I was on the train with
Mhm.
because she said something like Koreans are crazy. I think she was like, "Ah, Koreans are crazy," and I was like, everybody on this train
Can understand.
probably speaks English and probably understands what you just
Yep.
said. And I was like, you got to be really careful about stuff like that.
Mhm.
And that's probably why people don't speak to you in English because you
Yep.
probably came off as rude.
Yeah.
So, you got to be really careful and patient about things like that. I wouldn't exactly recommend to go up and demand, like, speak English
Oh,
to
yeah.
me or do you speak English? But
Yeah, I would never expect that, but you do get the funny experiences too, like when you go to a coffee shop, and I've had that happen to
mm,
me, like even at my local like loteria, which is like the local restaurant
fast food.
franchise, right,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
hamburgers. And
McDonald's.
as soon as I walk in, they see me, they're like, oh, it's a foreigner. And you kind of see the workers shuffle. They're like, hey, who speaks better, who's got the better points on this
Oh,
test,
right.
like,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
like I'm
The highest test result.
yeah.
That's
And
great.
I hear them, I understand what they're saying, but
Mhm.
I'm just like,
Right.
look, just speak normal. Like, honestly, I'm not expecting you
Mhm.
to speak English. Like, it's Korea. Of course, I'm going to expect Korean. And as soon as
Mhm.
I go up to order, you see their face, like they're scared, and you're uh, like, hamburger 하나 주세요. And they're like, oh my God, you speak Korean. Wow.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah. Or they calm down and they
yeah.
breathe.
Well, and that's right. When they breathe, they always hear like the, 다행이다. It's like, oh, great. They
Like a
speak.
sigh of relief. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, that's a good point. And there's a higher ratio of foreigners, and
Mhm.
I'd hate to use the word foreigners because that's used a lot in Korea,
Yeah.
and it feels like very separated and
Yeah.
alienated. But there's a higher percentage of of, I guess, non-Koreans
Hmm.
living in Korea who can speak Korean pretty well.
Yeah.
So it's not just that, people speak English, but also there's a lot of guys like us
Hmm.
who are, around and can speak Korean to some degree.
Yep.
And, you also have at this time, I think for the past 5 years straight,
Hmm.
Korea has the highest percentage of multicultural families
Yes. It's starting
living
to
there.
grow a lot more now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I wasn't the only person with a
Hmm.
child who was half Korean there.
Yeah.
We had several friends,
Hmm.
and my daughter could go out and play with them and
Hmm.
stuff. And they, we had our own community that was, you know, semi-integrated with Korea and also semi-integrated
Yep.
with each other.
Yep.
So it's not like a completely foreign thing. There's differences
Hmm.
in ways of life, but it's also very easy to adapt to for the most part.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to say thank you, Brian. I mean, I think that was a really good interview with you. Um, where can people find you if they have other questions that maybe they you can answer?
Um, wow. So I have a website, goodhabit.today,
Hmm.
and that's where I do a lot of my professional development and coaching, especially dealing with like business English and
Hmm.
interviews and preps for presentations. You can contact me through there. It's consultant at goodhabit.today.
Hmm.
I have an Instagram that I almost never use, which is good habits. Yeah, good habits today, I think.
Mm.
And then I also have my personal Instagram that I check all the time, and
Mm.
I love interaction. It's Klein, as in Klein, B photo, and that's mostly photography from Korea.
Mm.
And I love interaction. And please hit me up and message me. I'd be happy to hear from you.
Yeah. So again, thanks for coming on. And again, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to leave in the comments. If you guys want to see more interviews like this with other people that we've had interactions with, Brian and I are actually like really close friends. We know quite a few people, and we know one friend who knows everybody. So, uh,
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
there's a
we have resources.
we have a lot of resources, and
Yeah,
if you guys want to see more, I mean, definitely let us know, and we can get more out.
it was nice meeting you all. Thank you.
All right. Well, hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you guys next time. Bye.
안녕하세요.